He's the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, the National Treasure, Nick Aldis.
Eric, what's up, buddy? How are
How
you?
are you? How are you, man?
I'm very well.
Honored that you're on the show. There's so much to talk about. So let's get right into it.
Sure.
All right. Tell me why you decided to become a pro wrestler and who was your favorite wrestler growing up?
Well, I think I always played sports as a kid. I was the youngest in my family, youngest of my siblings, and I was very competitive. I loved playing sports. I did everything and competed at pretty decent level at a few different sports. And but for me, I just sort of started becoming more drawn to individual stuff, and I think there had always been a small part of me that wanted to be an entertainer as well. And I think that, I guess I was just always looking for that sort of, that vehicle that could blend the two. And then I was a fan of wrestling as a kid, but I'd sort of fallen off in the sort of early mid 90s, mid 90s, I suppose. I was a big fan of Brett and Davey Boy and stuff as a kid, but it was really more of like, I looked at them more like cartoon characters. I didn't really sort of understand much about it. But then, so as I sort of became a teenager, that just sort of coincided with the dawning of the Attitude Era and this huge boom in wrestling. And it just sort of occurred to me like, wow, this is a perfect marriage of the two things that I kind of want to do. And, just watching, like, The Rock was probably the biggest. Rock and Triple H were probably the biggest influences at that time. But then, also like DX, like X-Pac and Road Dogg. Just getting to see these guys like with their entrance, and then just watching everybody sort of in the palm of their hand, or like when Road Dogg would come out and do his whole spiel, and everyone would say all the words, and just all those guys, Conan in WCW and NWO and, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. Like, they were just cool guys. And I was like, these guys are cool and they don't give a damn. And, it was just so far removed from where I grew up, which was a very sort of plain conservative kind of middle of nowhere village in England, where everyone, most people that lived there sort of, their families lived there, their parents lived there, and the parents before them, and they got a job somewhere close by, and they never really left, and didn't, very few people really sort of ventured very far out, and I just had this whole different sort of view of life and what I wanted to do. So wrestling sort of became the thing.
How was it like, telling your family, friends that, pro wrestling is the route that you want to take?
Well, I started really preparing for it very early. I started lifting weights and sort of really got into bodybuilding. So I think and everyone knew I was a wrestling fan. So I think a lot of people sort of put two and two together and kind of went, okay, so he's really into wrestling, and I made some really significant gains quite quickly. When you're young, that's the best thing, is that you can make some, changes really quickly. My first year working out and, lifting weights and eating right, I probably put on, 20 pounds of muscle. So suddenly people are going, whoa, like, what's going on with this? What's going on with you? And I think a lot of people sort of put two and two together and just sort of, I don't ever remember sort of declaring like, I want to be. I think people just started figuring it out. And then obviously when I told my parents that I was going to go train with the Knight family, my mum was, trepidatious, but my dad was a rugby player, so he knew about rough and tumble. He wasn't scared of that. So he just went, okay, go do it, but treat it professionally, go commit to it properly.
Awesome. And you brought up Triple H, you brought up DX, you brought up Road Dogg. What do you feel, or what are your thoughts on the landscape of wrestling right now, with how it was in the Attitude Era to what it is now and where it is now?
Wrestling changes, and it tends to mirror what's going on with society, but it also tends to try to mirror what their target audience. Mm-hmm. So in the 90s, the fans were, our generation was sort of rebellious, and we were kind of sick and tired of having all these restrictions put on everything about, you know, what you could say and how you could act, and, you know, everything was very sort of buttoned up, and you know, there was a lot of regulation, because you have to remember, this was before social media. So this was before you could go on social media and see, you know, girls in thongs, like, you know, and all this, I mean, like fights, bar fights and craziness and stunts. You couldn't see any of that. Like now it's just normal, because you can go on Instagram and see like the craziest shit you want, like without even thinking. But, you know, our generation grew up differently than that. It was like, there was a bit, you know, there was more restrictions. So, you know, to suddenly see like guys, you know, sort of embracing and saying I had this conversation with Kevin Nash, because Nash is a friend of mine. And I mean, Kev saying like, you know, people act like it was so controversial. He's like, but it wasn't any worse than anything kids are saying on the street. And that's 100% true. I mean, I it's not like I grew up in some like super rough area. I grew up in quite a nice village. I mean, Kings Lynn, which is the nearest town, that's where I was born. You know, Kings Lynn could be a bit rough around the edges, but it wasn't like, so anyway, my point is, you know, as a kid, as a young teenager, I was exposed to, you know, people fighting, swearing, you know, like making out with girls, you know, all this kind of stuff. So I think it was just, that's, you know, so when wrestling started mirroring that, it was like, hell yeah, we can, you know, these guys are sort of who we can live vicariously through. And I think now it's just, you know, now they're trying to sort of figure out what the audience is into now. You know, is it comic books, video games, like, you know, sort of social media culture, this sort of meme culture, all that kind of stuff. And they're trying to find characters that sort of resonate with it. And it's, you know, it's just the business moves and changes, and, you know, it will continue to do that no matter what anyone, you know, there's a whole separate sub-genre now, a separate industry that we are currently taking part in, which is talking about wrestling. Like, it's, you know, no matter how much people talk about it, like, it's going to continue to evolve and adapt and change. It's part of life.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And that's a really cool story that you and Kevin Nash talked about. That's really awesome to hear. So I do want to go back, you know, because we're taking steps. You know, you talked about telling your family, your friends about wanting to become a wrestler, how you started getting bulkier, you got bigger. How was your first match like? You must have not been the scrawny kid in the locker room. So what was your story like?
It was terrifying. My first actual show was I was in a battle royal,
Right.
and it was actually in Norwich at a nightclub called the Talk, Talk of the Town, and it was packed, you know, and it was, you know, I mean, it was incredible. I mean, I could have done a lot worse for my first show. I mean, it was probably 1,000 people jammed in there, and it was like, atmosphere was great, and it was, you know, the Knights they had sort of built up a little, you know, really good little sort of fan base there, and they were a bit more of a sort of rough and tumble kind of fighting sort of crowd. They kind of liked physical. They liked it to be a bit, you know, stiff and a bit sort of a bit more realistic adult sort of stuff, like, you know, and then that was drilled into me from the beginning. And Jake the Snake was on that show. So, I mean, and Jake was one of my heroes as a kid. He was one of my favorites. I think I liked him because he looked a lot like my dad. Like, every now and then I'll post a picture of my dad and people always be like, oh my God, he looks just like Jake the Snake. But yeah, it was cool that he was there. All I remember was just being so nervous before going out for the Battle Royal, because they lined everybody up. You know that scene in Gladiator where they're all standing there waiting to walk out into the Coliseum, and the guy pisses his pants? It's like, I remember, I sort of felt like that guy, because the guy in front of me was terrified. Like, I was nervous, but this guy in front of me was like super, super nervous and just like trembling. and I always remember this because Jake was actually living in the UK at the time and had a wrestling school. And this kid who was in front of me was one of Jake's students.
Mm-hmm.
And he was sort of wearing like the sort of Billy Kidman style stuff, like the white wife beater like this one, and like the skate shorts and stuff. He was kind of going for that whole thing. And he had this pristine white, brand new like tank top on. And Jake came back, and Jake had got color. Jake was bleeding
mm-hmm.
from his match. And he walks back through the curtain and just, obviously could just, it was just this, typical sort of break in the new guy type thing. But he walked right up to this kid and just wiped his bloody head all over his white tank top. I went, good luck, kid. Get out there, like, and they're all going like, go, we're all going out. This guy was just mortified. He's oh my god, like. But that's all I remember about that. I couldn't tell you about the battle royal and stuff, but and then after that, I was broke in by doing mostly sort of tags and 6-man tags and stuff like that, and then I'm trying to remember my first single. I think my first singles match was actually down in Essex against a guy called Charlie Rage. And so I think it went all right. It was. I don't remember. I'm not one of those. I'm not particularly sentimental about a lot of that stuff. I obviously sort of remember the occasion, but I don't remember the match much. And I do remember that I want to say my third ever singles match was with Doug Williams, which was obviously a major deal
mm-hmm.
for me. Because I had also started training at another school because I just wanted to get more reps, and the Knights would basically run camps whenever they weren't running shows, and they were running a lot of shows. So it was sort of like frustrating because I wanted to train more.
Mm-hmm.
So I found this other school that they trained every week, and and they were closer to London. So by being closer to, I had to drive like almost 4 hours every week to go, but we didn't care. We all bundled into a car and went, me and a few of my friends from the same area. But one of the cool things about that school was because it was so close to London, they would have more guest trainers. So you would have, all kinds of guys from the World of Sport era. Like I remember Mick McManus came, and it was so cool that he came, and they had a lot of guys from that era because the guy who ran the school was from that era.
Mm-hmm.
But he would also bring in like Johnny Storm, who was becoming a really big name on the independent scene, and him and Jody Fleisch were going to America and having these killer matches. And then Doug was like the man, in the UK. Like for us, we all sort of looked at Doug as like, besides Regal and Dave Taylor, and those guys had all come and gone before way before my time. Like they'd all left and gone to the States like way before I broke in. And so there was sort of like, as far as the guys who were considered the top guys in the UK, it was kind of Doug Williams and Robbie Brookside, James Mason, but Doug was traveling the world. He was going to Japan and was going to Germany and going over to the States for Ring of Honor and stuff. And it was, for us, we were all looking at it sort of realistically going, well, so far the WWE, this was kind of before TNA. TNA was still relatively new,
mm-hmm.
but we all had this because Wade Barrett went to the same school as I did. We were at Marty Skrull, Shah Samuels, who's I forget his name in NXT now. Sorry, I can't remember his NXT name. Rampage Brown. I ran into him. There was a lot of guys, and I think we all sort of understood that, like, WWE are only going to hire a couple of people at a time, because they'd only ever had like one or two token Brits. It wasn't, and we would always get told that, it's like, They only want one Brit. They want one token British guy. So Doug was a real sort of inspiration to us because he was doing it a different way and was making a career of it. And, we were hearing like, wow, he makes really good money in Japan and stuff like that. So we were going like, wow, cool. Anyway, Doug came to a training session with me and, and then the school. And, off the back of that, he then recommended me to a couple of promoters and said, hey, if you want to give this kid a look, you can book him. You can book him with me if you want. And one of them took him up on it. And so they called me and said, Doug complimented you and said that you've got potential, and he said he's willing to wrestle you. So you want to come down and wrestle Doug? And I was just like, yeah, like, I'll be there, just tell me when, I'll be there. So yeah, that was, I think a lot of, and I can't stress this point enough, especially now, because there seems to be a sort of, I don't know, there's been a sort of negativity, I guess, associated with like bodybuilding and, getting in shape and having a good physique and stuff, like almost like somehow it's a shortcut or something, which is just bizarre to me. But I want to make this point that like, I was able to advance that quickly because I had a good look. Mm-hmm. Like I was training hard and I wanted to be a good wrestler, but the reason I was able to get the opportunities to get better quickly was because I had the look. Mm-hmm. So then it's like, okay, because I made the extra effort to train and try to look good, that's how I'm getting more chances to now I'm getting to work with Doug Williams. And then a year later I was working for Brian Dixon. So then I was getting to work alongside like James Mason and Robbie Brookside and Frankie Sloan and guys like that. So it's like, and the same can be said about like Sheamus and Drew and Stu, Wade Barrett. Like that was the sort of the difference maker, was that the guys who made the effort to have a good physique and to try to sort of package themselves and make themselves into an act were the guys who advanced the quickest.
Yeah, and I do want to address this. You talked about the call-ups in NXT and how they only wanted just a few people. Obviously the roster has changed. There's so much. How do you feel about how the company changed their original idea of who should be in the roster, who shouldn't be, what nationality?
Oh, I mean, like I said, I was just making that point because that was to illustrate how much we looked up to Doug, because mm-hmm. that at the time was that was the thought, like, there's probably only a couple of spots for British guys, over there. And then our generation, and again, I'm not taking credit for it solely, but I will say I played a part in it. Yeah, but our generation 100%. Changed that, like, because after I got obviously took a different route. I got an opportunity to be on a TV show, Gladiators, and that then sort of gave me a much bigger profile, and then that caught the attention of TNA and so on and so on. And then that opened the door for Doug, mm-hmm. So, but then by then, Stu had been signed and Sheamus had been signed and Drew had been signed and Tom had been signed. So it was like, it was changing. And now it's like that, now there's more Brits. Like the new one is now Australia, mm-hmm. Because it was like, there was like one Australian guy, and you sort of went, oh, cool, an Australian guy. And now it's like, because I think a big part of it is that you're more hungry. Like, I remember coming over to do Harley Race's camp and just seeing some of the guys there and just thinking like, you're just treating this like a tryout. Like, you think because they knew that someone from WWE always went to those camps. And don't get me wrong, that was a selling point, but I didn't go for that. I went because I wanted to get better. Mm-hmm. And, Mike Rotunda went. And you could tell that a lot of the guys were there just because they were like, this is my ticket. This is my way to get a look from WWE. And it's like, it doesn't work like that. And sure enough, by the end of the week, it was like, you could tell, I could tell that there was a handful of us that Harley was taking more of a shine to. One was me, one was Sam Shaw, who's now known as Dexter Loomis, and there was a handful of other guys. But I remember being there, and all these guys are talking about, what they do for a real job. You know, I do this, I do that. And I was going, I'm a wrestler. And they're going like, well, what do you mean? Like, I'm going, well, wrestling's my only job. And they're going, well, how is that possible? And I went, well, here's my booking sheet for next month when I go home to England. They were just like, what? So they couldn't believe there were so many shows and there was such a booming scene. You know, they were going like, how do you, and I was like, yeah, well, I mean, I think back and even though it was rough and, you know, a lot of us young guys got ridden pretty hard, like me and Tom got ridden pretty hard, like on the All-Star circuit because we were like 18 years old. I do think back on it and think, God, it was such a good time. It was such a great time in my life because I was wrestling every day and just had no responsibilities, no bill. My only responsibility was basically to eat and do laundry, you know, and try to have a good match, like, and try not to get heat, you know. It's like I didn't have to worry about bills or taxes or anything. I mean, I basically didn't even really live anywhere. Like I would go home, I would go to my parents' house about like once every 2 weeks and, you know, do laundry and stuff. But a lot of the time that was just kind of like, you know, we're literally on the road all the time. And I think for a lot of us, like we sort of, who broke in that way, I think it translates. And I think you see that now with the Aussies is like, they're ready to sort of tell everyone like, no, look, we're not, you know, it's a bit like the old Conor McGregor thing from back in the day where he said, you know, we're not here to take part, you know, we're here to take over, you know, and like that, I know that that's how our generation of Brits sort of felt. And I see that now with the Aussies, you know, like Bronson Reed, I wrestled him when he was Jonah Rock, like he's killing it. And like Robbie Eagles is killing it in New Japan. And, you know, there's a bunch of Aussie girls in NXT and all over the place. And it's like, it's cool to see because it's, you know, I remember that feeling and I get the same vibe watching them now as I did from sort of our generation of Brits, like sort of 15 years ago.
That's awesome. And, you know, you talked about, you know, going home, you know, every 2 weeks. How is the psychology, the mental psychology of leaving, always traveling, being on the road? How is that like? I
loved it. I mean, that was like, don't get me wrong, it all depended on who you were with. Like, you know, me and Tom, that's where, you know, that's where my friendship with Tom became so strong and so bonded, was because every week you would basically show up at the start of the loop and you didn't know who else was going to be there. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of the time, Tom and I wouldn't be on the same ones because we were slated in the same spot, you know, so it was kind of like, but on the, you know, when we did show up and we were both there, we were just so happy because we knew, okay, this is going to be a fun week. You know, if it was the wrong crew, like, and it was, you know, sort of more like grumpy old guys, yeah, that could be a bit like that could get you down. That could grind on you a little bit and can wear on you a little bit. But for the most part, it was like, you know, it was just an adventure, like traveling around and, you know, wrestling, setting the ring up and, you know, going out, like trying to get laid, you know, whatever. Like it was just all, you know, I was 18. It was not, you know, it was like, I loved it. I was like, I'd much rather be doing this. And I saw it for what it was, as a sort of paid education, which is actually what later on when I went to TNA a couple of years later, that's what Terry Taylor described, you know, my TNA contract was. You know, he's like, you're getting paid to go to college. Like you're getting a paid education here because the TNA roster at the time was so stacked. I mean, an incredible roster. And, you know, here I am, I was like 21 and just like thrown in at the deep end. But that's how I always remember that. I always remember Terry saying to me, you're getting paid to go to school here. Like, you know, and he was right. Like I could have been in developmental. I could have been going to wrestling practice every day and stuff, but I was working. I was like working with beer money and, you know, every now and then I might get to do a little thing with Booker T or Scott Steiner or Kevin Nash, or, you know, Kurt Angle, Sting. And, you know, I mean, I got to wrestle Sting. Yeah. Like I'd been in the company about 4 or 5 months, I think. I got to wrestle Sting and I was just like, what, me? Like, what? You know, but Like how, I mean, I always look back on that and think, God, I was so fortunate.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about that because, I was going to bring up Impact. I was going to bring up Magnus. So let's talk about that. As you said, a lot of memory, you learned there. How was it like going there? How was it like participating in, that ring and that atmosphere with that roster? And then my next follow-up question would be, now that the universes of wrestling is all coming together slowly, the character Magnus, character Nick Aldis, if you ever do decide to go back to Impact or whatever, or Impact decides to come to NWA, whatever it is, what are we going to see? Are we going to get any confirmation about the characters or anything like that? Does that matter?
Well, look, I'm Nick Aldis. That's who I am. It's not like it would be some sort of
kayfabe, whatever. Like because
no, yeah, I would be. It would, I would just embrace that was the name that I, used to wrestle as in that company. But no, to answer your first question, look, TNA gave me everything. It was, like I said, it was an incredible opportunity, and I think that just now in 2021, people are finally starting to sort of look back at TNA and acknowledge it and go, wow, it was better than than the internet would have us believe at the time. Like, the internet was very harsh on TNA, I thought, always very critical. And when you look back on it, and it's funny because I would never say it because I was, it wasn't my place to say it, but I would hear certain guys who, especially ones who were sort of involved more involved in the behind the scenes stuff, when they would hear about all this criticism and all the sort of online, trolling of TNA and stuff, and they'd say, well, you'll miss us when we're gone. And I think that's the case. I think, and look, I know Impact is still a thing, but that's why I say TNA, because obviously I think that, I'm just saying this as an observation. It's not a negative thing. It's just the way I perceive it. It's like I look at the TNA era as a sort of totally different. I mean, it was essentially a completely different company. Like it's completely different management, different owners. Almost. I mean, really, Scott D'Amore is like pretty much the only sort of link between the two, but even that was sort of like he was not in a management position at any point that I was there. He was actually my agent for a while, like my legit like talent agent for a while. So it was like, and yeah, look, obviously Mickey's been showing up there and working out some stuff, and we're going to have there's going to be some Impact presence, it looks like, at the Empower show. That's all great, like that's cool. And I think that I feel like it's look, promotions working together is nothing new, especially if you look at Japan. I mean, it's been a thing for a long time, but even you go back in the 90s with WWF and ECW, and like WCW would do stuff with New Japan and AAA. So it's really nothing new. I would say that I guess in the modern era, or in the current sort of era, I feel like we had a quite a strong part to play with that with Ring of Honor, like with Cody and I, with All In, but all that stuff. Because obviously, look, Cody and I stuff kind of stands alone, but it's I think it's fair to note that it was an agreement between the NWA and Ring of Honor at the time, because Cody was working for Ring of Honor then, so with Bucks and all that. So it's like, and I don't know, I was glad that Billy always had that philosophy right from the start, and I wish I could tell you which particular interview, but if you go back and find interviews with me from 3 or 4 years ago, especially in the lead up to All In and stuff, one of the things I was saying quite a bit was I believe that the future of the business, that, you know, in the near future, was going to be more collaborations between promotions, because the fans were just going to demand it.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're going to start going, well, hey, I want to see this guy wrestle this guy, and the only reason it can't happen is because you said so, you know, and they start going, that's not good enough. You know, we want to see it, make it happen. Like, and sometimes it will and sometimes it won't, you know what I mean? But I think overall, I think for the most part, most promotions have started to realize, yeah, you know what? There's money being left on the table with certain matchups. And you kind of work it out almost like boxing promoters do, because it's like, okay, Manny Pacquiao signed to, you know, Bob Arum, and, you know, Floyd Mayweather's, you know, his own promoter, whatever the case may be, but they managed to come together because ultimately they went, there's money to be made. And obviously that's a completely different stratosphere, you know, monetarily, but it's like, but the same kind of stuff applies, where it's like, there are certain matchups that people want to see. It can be done if everybody puts their dicks away and just thinks about making money.
Was that your mentality for All In? And then we're going to go back. I do want to talk about All In later, but was that your mentality for All In? Because if you know, care about my opinion, when I watched All In, or to think about it now, I feel like, you know, it didn't tarnish anything in your record, but I feel like that one loss, I don't know if it was necessary. I don't know if it was, you know, the greatest decision, you know, I know it was for the show. All In was a really big show. So to lose the title to Cody and get it back at the next NWA event, you know, that being said, was it something that you to this day think, you know, that was a good decision to do, to participate in?
Absolutely. I mean, it's, you know, the title's only as important as the feeling that it gives when somebody wins it, right? Now, that's one of the reasons why I sort of believe in long title reigns. Maybe not as long as this, but, you know, circumstances, you know, are what they are. But no, look, it's business. Like, at that time, I mean, man, you know, that event happened in August of 18. And I had only even agreed to sort of come on and do like work with the NWA in September of 17. So it wasn't even a year. So to then be part of the, you know, really the most talked about show of the year outside of WrestleMania and, you know, WWE events, it was like, can't put a price on that.
That's awesome. You know, that's one of the biggest questions that I was excited to talk to you about, because right now you're holding more than the 1,000-day champion, and I feel like that was your only, you know, loss was to Cody, and then you got it back in the 2 out of 3 falls, if I'm not wrong. That was what the match was, which was excellent. Both matches were excellent. You know, how, you know, we'll get back to the All-In part. We were talking about Impact, and we're talking about that. So last question would be, do you believe the NWA would be open to more crossovers? And when I mean crossovers, I mean just coming to the companies like New Japan's doing a lot right now. AEW, Kenny Omega's holding multiple. And I know people have asked you this before, so, you know, you can repeat the same answer, but people always just want to know what's going on with that, because Kenny Omega is holding the title in Impact. Are you interested for Kenny Omega to, you know, show up to NWA? You know, are you interested to grab, you know, any title specifically?
If it makes sense business wise, if the money is right, like, and there's a benefit to everyone involved. I mean, I've said the same thing over and over again, and people can't seem to wrap their head around it. But there has to be a benefit for everybody. When Cody and I did it, there was a benefit to everybody involved, right? And so that's really all I want to say about it now.
No problem. No, I don't want you to go. That you proved, you saying that makes a lot of sense, and I get it 100%. Have you ever, and this is a creative idea, have you ever decided to write your own storylines when it comes to these things? Like, if someone pitches an idea to you, do you get final approval if you want to do it now, or are you just following what the writers or what, you know, companies decide?
Well, first of all, we don't have any writers, but But look, it's Billy's company. It's not mine. But yeah, I'm a 1099, you know. And again, Nash paid me a big compliment the last time I saw him. I saw him a few weeks ago in Baltimore, and Kev said to me, you know, he says, you're a true 1099. And what he meant by that was, you know, there are benefits and drawbacks to being a 1099. Like people tend to focus on the negatives because that's just the nature of wrestling on the internet. Like, oh, they don't get this, they don't get that. Okay, yeah, no, that's true. But what you're supposed to get in exchange for not having the sort of restrictions of being an employee, what you're supposed to have is more of a say over, you know, how you do your job, and it's a sort of, you're contracted to do, you know, certain work, and kind of you agree that sort of ahead of time, and that's very much the way that I've always done business with the NWA. Is like, hey, it's the right, I think it's the right thing to do, and it's not going to harm my market value. Cool, let's do it. You know, it's only, I'm interested in doing anything that increases, that's good business for everybody involved. That's how the business is supposed to work.
All right, awesome. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend or, you know.
Well, no, you didn't. It's just I try to be as definitive as possible with it, because the more I say that, you know, the more stuff can get misquoted and taken out of context and used for clickbait. So it's like, ultimately, it's whenever something is presented to me, or I present something, think of something, it's because I see it making sense and helping everybody make more money.
That's awesome. It's an awesome mentality. So another thing I do want to talk about is your more than 1,000 days reign already as NWA World Champion. How is that, and what does that mean to you to hold that title? Because we know the NWA is very special to you. Champions, multiple NWA champions, you know, have many meaning to you. So talk to us about how is it like to hold it for 1,000 days, and just, you know, who's next on your list that you would like to get in the ring with, since you faced off so many people for that title.
Yeah, look, it's just from purely from a sort of historical standpoint. Yeah, it's very special. Like, I know, you know, it's become this real polarizing thing, and it's like, guys, it's not like I'm sitting here going, nope, I'm not wrestling anyone. You know, I don't want to defend it. Like, that's not how it works. Again, it's not. I've never done business like that. That's not how it works. But it's just circumstances, and at this point, it's kind of like, if you've held on to it this long, why would you just rush to do something with it, as, you know, just simply because people are, you know, saying, you know, talking shit online? It's like, we've got a big show, we've got big sort of tentpole events. You know, the whole point of this is so that it means something, you know, when the time is right. I've been very proud of the work I've done. It's not really about the length, you know. It's not about. I mean, it's a cool milestone, you know, and it's probably unlikely that many others will hit that, you know, in our lifetime, and that's a cool thing. But obviously, there's you know, but there are caveats to that with the pandemic and everything. But yeah, so I guess, you know, on a sort of, just on a purely sort of trivial kind of historical level, yeah, it's cool. What I'm more proud of is the fact that there's a whole lot of guys and girls now who are getting paid to wrestle and getting exposure, and many of whom have used the platform to now get themselves their own guaranteed contracts, you know, and enhance their careers, essentially because of my commitment to the NWA and the title. And that's a good feeling. I don't need any thanks for it, or you know, any more credit than I deserve, but it's a cool feeling to have, because I know that there are a lot of guys now who put food on the table because of wrestling, and I helped make that happen. So, you know, people can say what they want, but that's an achievement that I take a lot of pride in, because not a lot of people can say that, especially in this generation.
Agreed. If you have one, since you defend that title multiple times, even during the pandemic, is there any match that you really enjoyed? Even though all your matches are amazing, everyone should check them out. Is there specifically the one that you look at and you look at it differently than the others? Maybe because of the meaning behind it, or just based on how the match went out?
I think the rematch with Cody in Nashville, 2 out of 3, because we worked really hard. I mean, we put in a lot of time, and we busted our ass, and we set a box office record for wrestling at Nashville Fairgrounds. It was always going to suffer from being the follow-up to All In. So it's like, it wasn't 10,000 people going bonkers in an arena. So it's like, I feel like if it had happened at some other time, it would be remembered differently.
Mm-hmm.
But I personally felt like All In was just such a crazy experience all the way around, that it was really about the moment, and we all knew that. And I was, obviously, for me, that moment, especially at the beginning of the match, All In, with the whole place standing in anticipation for the match. Again, very few people get to experience that. So again, I was kind of like, I always sort of took that as like, that was my pop. Like, that was my little kind of, that was their way of, everyone kind of knew what we were there, what they wanted to see, but that was their way of kind of giving me a little nod and going like, well done. And when you have a moment like that with someone, you kind of share this special, you have a different sort of relationship with them. And I think that after the match in Nashville, it was just that was sort of strengthened even more, where it was sort of like, we're a little competitive with each other, but in a healthy way, like just in a sort of athlete, in the way that athletes are. But I'm very grateful to Cody for all of that. So I think that one is one, just because I think especially with that show, because that was the first standalone NWA pay-per-view, and it did very well. So it was kind of like, now, we were off to the races. And again, that was my whole point of, so going back to what I said before about it having to make sense for everybody involved, because of All In, and because of the exposure, and because of the quality of the execution of that from everybody involved, but especially from the NWA side with the 10 Pounds of Gold series, and really building that anticipation to and the meaning behind it with Cody and his family and everything, to the execution of the match and the chemistry that Cody and I had. All of that then led to us being able to now sell out a building and set a box office record in that building, and have a successful pay-per-view, which then helped build momentum for that company, and which led to more collaboration with Ring of Honor, which led to the Crockett Cup, which was another night for me, which I hold very, very dearly, because I was very proud of that match. And Marty and I have been friends since we were teenagers. And so again, just another huge accomplishment. And then that sort of kept the momentum going, and then, kept building my credibility, and then kept building the credibility of the brand, which then led to Power. And then it was like, by the time we got to Power, we were sort of throwing back to how the whole thing started with me and Tim Storm. And, Tim, like, I'm as proud of my match with Tim Storm as any match I've ever had in my career, because, again, just because of like the story we told and the trust we had for one another. So those three probably stand out. But I'd like to think, I have every intention of making NWA 73 in St. Louis, on par with those as far as meaning.
Of course. And, something I want to ask you is, you're holding this title. When that time comes, is what's the next goal for you? What's the goal that you place on yourself when it comes to every match, after every defense? What's the main goal for you?
Leave it better than you found it. That's it. Like, that's the, if whoever beats me for the title, if their market value goes up and there's another guy that can help pull the wagon, like, then I've done my job. There's another guy that can, is now being booked more. And I want to make this point. Like, I worked without a contract. I didn't even have a contract at All In. Billy had offered me one, and I said no. Not because I was trying to hold out or anything, but because I was making such good money independently, and my asking price had like doubled and then tripled, like, for title defenses, because I was doing the work, and promoters literally all over the world, all over Europe. I went to Australia, China, all over the US. They were starting to go, I want that. I want that at my show. Like, I want that meaning. I want that, like, significance. I want, like, someone to, I'm not saying this to brag, but I've lost count of how many times I've finished a match and my opponent got a standing ovation. Like, that's the whole point. Like, that's what I went in there to do. It wasn't about me. Like, because I know that by him getting the standing ovation, he now knows forever that it was from wrestling me and wrestling for the NWA title. And I think, that's how you play the long game and you build your value, not going into business for yourself. Like, there's a lot of people who will go out there and get all their shit in and not sell for anyone and hit every cool move they can and, and put themselves over, but they burn out because eventually, how many times can you see that?
True.
But when it's like, when you can create a situation where it just feels special, that, like, this guy gets the chance to beat you, like, that was the inspiration I took from Triple H and Ric Flair and Harley Race, and even further back than that, like Dory Funk and Jack Briscoe, guys like that was the whole point.
That's amazing. And honestly, just the way you put it, just the way you said it, the mentality you have, it's genius. Like, I've interviewed many people. Never once have I heard the mentality of, they'll always remember that it was because of me, that their match was amazing. The crowd was crazy about it. Like, that's a really interesting thought, and I think everyone's going to be thinking about that one for a while. Another thing I want to talk about is if you ever had an amazing road story. You've been in the wrestling business for so long, you've had so much, you've learned so much, you've met with so many people. Is there a funny road story?
Well, let me just stop you there, but you're making me sound old now. You've been in the business for so long. I go, whoa, I'm 34.
You just held that title for way too long. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. I've been in the business for way too long. That's true. This one springs to mind, and only because I was just telling this story the other day to someone. But so people always love a good shit story, right? So it's like I've never shit my pants in the ring. Let me just say that I've come close. I remember. I was wrestling Samoa Joe once. In fact, both of these stories involve Samoa Joe. But I was wrestling Samoa Joe once, and he gave me a muscle buster. And I thought I shit my pants. It just turned out to be a really bad fart. But for a second, it was like, did that just happen? It also happened when I wrestled James Storm, and he gave me a suplex on the floor. And I hate that part. I mean, that when you bump on the concrete like that, for a second, I sort of went numb, because I hit my sort of lower back. And again, I thought that I'd shit myself, and I had to kind of, try to sneak a feel, without people noticing, like, just to make sure. But fortunately, both times I had not. But this story was, Joe and I were the TNA tag champions at the time. And we were on a house show loop for TNA, and it was somewhere like out in the boondocks, like I want to say like West Virginia, somewhere like that. And it was one of those towns where by the time we got out of the building, like nothing was open. Like there's no restaurants that were open. All the restaurants closed at 10 o'clock because it was like, kind of hick town, like, so that, nothing stayed open. No 24-hour places. And I was riding with Crimson. And the only place that was open, the only place that had food was this like Subway, like gas station Subway at, midnight. And I get food poisoning. I get the stuff and it's like, should know. I mean, the guy serving us looked like Bobby from King of the Hill. But so I should have known. But anyway, by the time we get to the hotel in the next town, like I already know like this doesn't feel good. And then by about 3 a.m, I'm just puking and just like really bad. I'm curled up in a ball. I'm like, can't keep anything down, can't keep any water down, no nothing. It's like when I get it bad. And I remember like just being like, just sick as a dog, but you gotta make the town.
Mm-hmm.
Crimson called D'Lo Brown, who was the agent on those shows, and he says, look, Nick's pretty messed up. Like he got food poisoning and he's been puking all night. He's like, he's messed up. D'Lo's like, all right, well just, is he still puking? And he's like, no, but only because he's not eating anything, drinking anything. D'Lo's, all right, we'll just get him here and we'll see what we'll see how he feels. So I get to the building and D'Lo's like, can you work? And I said, barely. He could tell looking at me. He was like, oh, okay. He's like, as soon as I walked in, he took one look at me and went, oh boy. I was green, but luckily, Joe and I are the tag champions. So at least it's going to be a tag match. So it's like, I remember I was so messed up, like, when you're so, so exhausted and dehydrated and everything from being sick, like I forgot my boots. Like I packed all my gear in my bag, but not my boots.
Mm-hmm.
Then I had to borrow someone else's boots. So I threw I want to say it was Gunner's boots, it was Jackson Riker now, WWE. I throw them on. And I'm like, obviously I've taken Pepto and anything I can to just okay, whatever, just try to I was even trying to sort of time it when I would puke, if I needed to puke again. I'll try to puke right before we go out so that I can get through, whatever. And obviously, I wasn't really worried about the match because I knew Joe would take care of me. Joe was just kind of like, I got you. And I think we had already sort of worked out okay, well, I'll just come in and we'll just do a couple of double teams. I'll stay on the apron and something else, and then I'll get knocked off the apron or whatever, and we'll do some kind of weird finish.
Mm-hmm.
And Gail Kim was wrestling before us. I remember that because I remember hearing 1, 2, 3, and Gail's music, right? And at the house shows, JB, Jeremy Borash, he would kind of vamp for about 2 or 3 minutes in between each match, so the finish would happen, music would play and they'd leave, and then JB would kind of G up the crowd. All right, who's ready for some more? All right, hey, we've got some big deals coming up here in the interval. You can, get a picture with Velvet Sky, whatever, right? It'd be a little bit of 2 or 3 minutes of vamping, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember I was stood around at the curtain and I hear Gail's music, and I stood there, and then I just I thought I needed to pass gas. and then like I just shit my pants.
So that was the time.
And I just feel like, oh my God. So I just looked at Joe and went, stall. So I go running back to the dressing room, like take off my stuff, throw it right in the trash. I don't even attempt to try to save it. I just throw it right in the trash, put on another pair of tights, come back out, you know, and
it's a good thing you have another pair of tights.
Have gone out, and it's like literally right as I come back, it's like the music starts hitting, and Joe looked at me, and like right before we go out, Joe's like, I think at first he thought I was going to puke, and then he looked at me and went, did you shit yourself? Did you shit your pants? And I was like, yes, I did. And then we just walked through the curtain, like, yeah. So on the way to the ring, we're having this conversation, like, yeah, like, yep, just shit my pants. He's like, oh, that was. He said, well, at least it didn't happen. I said, that's what I'm saying. You know, like, so you never know what people are talking about on the way to the ring. When you see guys, a lot of the time when you see guys in there, like, you know, jaw jacking, it looks like they're just like, you know, trash talking their opponents or whatever. A lot of the time we're just, you know, talking about stuff like that.
So wait, so you had 2 pairs of tights? You were prepared with that?
Oh yeah, I mean, I always do anyway. And most of the guys I know, most of the pros I know, I'd like to always have at least one backup pair.
Mm-hmm. All right. So another thing I really want to talk about is how you and Mickie James met. There's a lot of people that, you know, ask that question a lot. I've never got the answer. I've never heard the story. So if you would like to share,
we met at TNA. She showed up and she came at I want to say at the tail end of 2009 or 2010. I forget. Maybe it was 2010. No, it was 2010 maybe. Yeah, and she, you know, I'd never met her, and she showed up, and I just remember she had this. She was doing this thing where she was going to sing, and Lisa Marie was going to attack her on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, Mickie she's wearing this dress, and I was just like, and I remember Doug Williams kind of leaning over. She walked past us in catering, and Doug looked at me and was like, hey, you know, your eyes are popping out your head, you know what I mean? And then the next day at the TV taping, you know, I just introduce myself or whatever and say, how you doing, whatever. And then, but then the next day, I was getting ready to go do promo pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like pumped up, and I've got my tights on, and I've, you know, oil up and all that kind of stuff. But it's early in the day, and Mickie just happened to be at the ring, like, and she was, you know, I don't know what she was like going over something, whatever. But I had to walk past the ring to get to the area where I took pictures. And she's not very subtle. She's kind of loud. So she thought that she was speaking quietly, but she wasn't. So I walked past, and I just hear her go like, I'm a looking and I'm a liking. and I just like stopped, and I just remember her just being like, oh no. And like I just remember seeing Al Snow just like head in his hands like, oh my God. Like, what an idiot. and then obviously there was kind of an icebreaker after that, because it was kind of like, I'm sure that some people would kind of told her like, oh God, he was like checking you out, you know, yesterday. And then obviously it was, you know, back this way, you know, that, so it was just sort of pretty natural after that. It was kind of like, we just happened to, you know, go to the same place, and, you know, that night, and the rest is history.
That's awesome. That's such a funny, romantic story. That's really nice. You know, another question I want to ask you, and this one's a little bit sensitive, so it's up to you if you want to answer it. You know, those people who aren't with us anymore are always in our hearts, in our spirits, in our memory. And I wanted to ask you if you have a favorite memory of, you know, the question mark from NWA, the character, the person, you know, everyone. The show that NWA pulled was beautiful.
Yeah. Look, Joseph was great guy, and you know, I know that it's easy for everyone to say about anyone who passes away that, you know, he's a great guy, and he's a bit, you know, Joseph really was. He's just a really unique, different guy. He was kind of an oddball and kind of, you know, just different, and just a very interesting guy. Lived an interesting life. You know, I admired that about him. I always take pride in the fact that the last time I saw him was he was at my house, and he came and we were just chatting, and he had come by to drop something off. And then we ended up like catching up for like an hour, just, you know, talking about, and I swear to God, most of the conversation was about our kids. You know, he was talking about, he was just so excited to tell me that he had done all this stuff for his sons. I mean, he worshipped his son. Like, he just, you know, he had done all this stuff for his room, and he's like, I got him this, and I made him this, and I've been working on this thing for a while, and I've made him his own, you know, arcade thing. I forget what it was, but I was just like, wow, that's so cool. And you could just, you know, you could see how excited he was to talk about it. Just a genuinely sweet guy. My favorite memory of him was probably when I was like the third or fourth episode of NWA Power. And it was like people were starting to get behind that character, and it's sort of taken on a life of its own. And that crowd had sort of decided, like, we're gonna go for this. And he walked out and just got this huge response. And I just remember standing there looking at Billy, and Billy looking at me like, and I just said, this is so nuts, you know. But it was like this, you know, in the best possible way. I was just like, this is bonkers. And it was just like, we were all just, I think everyone was so thrilled, like that it was getting that kind of reaction, because it was like, one, we knew it was just a cool thing that was separate from everything else going on the show, like the more serious stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But also because of how much it meant to him, because Joseph had been, you know, plugging away at this for a long, long time. And so for him to finally get a little taste of like being a somebody and being important and having a following and, you know, really getting a sort of star reaction was like, you know, that's, you know, you love to see it. So yeah, we miss him.
Thank you for sharing. I know it's, you know, very difficult to talk about, you know, things that we still to this day can't believe is reality. And, you know, another thing I want to talk about is pandemic hit hard. Wrestling was without its fans, and, you know, everyone, including the wrestlers, the fans, could see how hard that is. So what does it mean to you? How do you feel about, you know, all these fans coming back, ready, stronger, willing to, you know, support as much as possible? And after you answer that question, you know, what's the largest crowd you ever worked, the smallest crowd? And don't answer with the no fans thing. Answer with like a realistic, like, small crowd that you've worked. And what's the strangest place that you wrestled? Like the weirdest, strangest place.
Well, God, there's a lot to unpack. Again, if you go back and see interviews I did during the pandemic, one of the things I touched on was that there's one positive to take away from all this, which was there'll be a renewed enthusiasm from the audience and a renewed appreciation for the live event experience from the wrestlers. Mm-hmm. I hoped that would basically translate to a style that was more about storytelling and less about kind of TV and less about, you know, just sort of trying to, letting things register and letting things settle a bit and letting the people digest it, because, hey, they've taken a break now. So, you know, now we can kind of be a bit more efficient and a bit more judicious. I'd say the first part of that has turned out to be true. I don't know about the second part, but, you know, we'll see. Biggest crowd, I don't know. I don't know how big those Wembley crowds got, but it was probably either that or All In. And then, well, and I I worked a couple of big shows for Noah in Japan, and I don't know what the attendances were, but I know that one of them was like Sumo Hall. I don't know what, and it was packed. I don't know what the attendance was, but and obviously I appeared at Madison Square Garden, but I was just doing commentary, so it was, you know, it's like, yes, I technically worked and performed, but I didn't wrestle, so, you know, but that, I mean, the Garden was packed, so, you know, whatever the attendance was at the Garden, I guess, was, you know, it was probably up there like 18,000, so I don't know. So the smallest, God, I don't know, legit. I do remember one show I did, and it was so embarrassing because my friends, it was after I had done Gladiators, and I had accepted this booking, an independent booking, and it happened wherever the show was, it was like a bunch of my castmates from the show happened to live in that area, so they had all decided to come, and they were half the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this guy just didn't know what the hell he was doing. He was just a complete joker. Like, you know, that's the risk you take sometimes in wrestling. You know, you get booked, you don't know who you're dealing with, and you show up, and, you know. I've had to do, on more than one occasion, I've had to, I mean, not recently, but back in the day, I've had to do the whole frog march somebody to the ATM to pay me thing, because they've tried to sort of, is there some way I can maybe write you a check, or maybe, you know, can I send it? So, nope, you're gonna put the cash in my hand right now. I've had to do that at least twice. Those were both back in England, but that was one of those. But when I trained at Dropkicks, which was the other school I went to in England, they used to do, the school was joined onto, they shared the building with a social club. Mm-hmm. And a social club is kind of like a pub, but you have to be a member, and the idea being that it's not for profit, so the drinks are cheaper. The idea is that, like, the membership fees and, you know, what you pay for the basically just sort of cover the costs. Mm-hmm. We would do shows in there, but again, it was really, you know, the whole point of it was that it was for learning. So, I mean, you know, sometimes there would be 10 people in there. Because they didn't really advertise it. They just put the ring in there, and it was like, I mean, we used to joke that the audience was made up of people who were sort of looking up from their newspaper, like, what's going on? Like, wrestling, you know, like, why is this happening? You know, we were like, they didn't want us there. Like, they were, you know, as far as they were concerned, we were ruining a perfectly good night for them. But, you know, for us, it was important. But yeah, so those are probably the worst ones.
All right. You know, we are coming down to the end because, you know, you're short on time, and I want to ask you a few last questions. One of them is, you know, being NWA World Heavyweight Champion is a big deal. Who, as a fan's perspective, is your greatest NWA's World Champion? Out of all the people that have held that title, in your opinion, who do you think holds that spot as a fan's perspective?
Oh, I would probably have to give it to Flair. I mean, Harley as well, but I would say Flair, just because of the amount of eyeballs he brought to it, and the amount of and for Flair, I think the one thing the thing about Rick that no one will ever touch Rick for this is the amount of guys that he made, like the amount of people that he made along the way, and the amount, and I don't think anyone's because a lot of that was still in the territory days. I don't think anyone really grasps how many people, after working with Rick, could then draw money by themselves, you know, all over the country and around the world. So I'd say for everything he did for the prestige of the title and for the business overall, it would be Ric Flair. He's the greatest of all time.
All right, well said. And you brought up Harley for a second. I do want to ask this question. You know, almost forgot to ask it. Do you have any memory of, like, your favorite memory, you know, with Harley? If it was training, if it was just a word of advice he gave you, anything like that?
Two things stand out. One, we were training one day, and about 3 or 4 days into the camp, and Harley would just sit like in the corner, like, and just watch everything. And he was, you know, didn't say a lot. And then every now and then he would just kind of call you over. And I went through a bunch of things and did some stuff. And he called me over, and, you know, after I was done, and he just said, "You got a future, kid. You looking good. You know, you look real good out there. Like, just keep going. Like, you could do something." And like, it was like, that was so, you know, that was huge. Mm-hmm. And then that day he sort of took me to his office and showed me all this cool stuff, like all this memorabilia. He showed me these old checks, you know, like huge money, you know, like sort of, and, you know, I'd be like, "See this?" You know, like, and I'd be like, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "It's there." He's like, "It's there for you." You know, he's like, you just gotta, you know, he's like, "Just know your worth, know your value. You can do it." You know what I mean? And then the other one was, the hotel that we all stayed at was across the street from a strip club. And it was like very obviously a strip club. I can't remember the name of it, but it's like, it stood out like a sore thumb, right? But I guess maybe he thought because I'd come from England, I didn't know what it was. But he goes, "You know what that is over there?" And I was just kind of like, "Yes, sir." And he's like, "It's a titty bar." Yep. And he goes, "When you go in there, not if you go in there, when you go in there." He's like, "When you go in there, just tell them you know Harley, they'll take care of you." I was just like, "Okay, yes, sir."
It's amazing. Oh my God. You know, and just, you know, to end it off, one of my favorite memories, you know, was meeting you at the big event. Your son was there, and I wanted to ask you, how was that like to take your son sometimes on the road, or just to have your son watch you take photos with all these fans that come out? You know, the value of being a father, what's that like? How has that changed?
Well, being a parent, being a father is more important than anything I've done in wrestling. I mean, that's, you know, it goes without saying. I take pride. I'm very proud of the fact that he's come with me to so many things and been exposed to the business. Not because I want him to get into the business necessarily, but just because he will now have a point of reference for people following their passion and being in an environment that sort of harnesses like people's passion and their creativity and their, you know, their sort of hunger and work ethic. He was there for the first 3 or 4 seasons of NWA Power. He was right there. And like that, there's the, you know, the atmosphere of, especially the first season of NWA Power was so special. Like there was just such an amazing sort of vibe from the whole, you know, the whole time. Everybody was just trying to bring it. Like everybody was going out and trying to, you know, top the last promo and the last match and that kind of thing. And, you know, he's been at Wembley Arena. He's been at Monday Night Raw. He's been at, you know, all kinds of stuff. But I just want him to be able to, if he can be around that, he knows that, especially when he's been at Monday Night Raw with Mickie, but, you know, even with all of this stuff, he's been around, you know, a high level, mm-hmm. you know, close to the highest level. You know, obviously at Monday Night Raw, that's, you know, that's pretty much the highest level, you know. So at least, so it's like, the way I look at it is that whatever he decides to do in his life, he won't have any of that. He won't, you know, hopefully he won't have any limiting beliefs. Mm-hmm. Because I've met a lot of people who had way more talent and way more ability, but they had limiting beliefs. Like they just didn't, you know, they just had sort of already told themselves that it wasn't going to happen for them. And you think like that, it won't. And for him, it's like, he won't grow up with that because he's like, he's been exposed to it. So he's, you know, so I think, and I like the idea of him being around a group of people who truly love what they do and are committed to it and want to sort of, you know, be total professionals, because if he can then carry that over into whatever he decides to do, then then we've done a good job as parents, because that's really what it's all about, is committing to whatever you decide to do, 100%, and approaching it professionally, and with pride, and taking pride in what you do, and having a great work ethic. That's how you succeed.
Awesome. And the final, two small questions are: what is the next ring gear, your next gear color pattern we're gonna see? I'm very big fan of your gears. I love seeing all the new styles you do. I know you're into it. I can tell when someone's into the gear when they, try hard. What is the next pattern that we might see? If you give us a sneak peek, like what's the next design or color?
I got a couple of colors in mind. One is like a very dark navy blue, like a royal blue, like with gold and white, like kind of a nautical type of deal. And then the other I'm thinking about is like a kind of gunmetal gray, if I can find the right sort of like steel gray, or like a sort of almost charcoaly type of deal, like, with some sweet trim and stuff like that. It'll be, I'm working with my gear guy on it, and we'll,
That's awesome.
Probably be at 73.
Well, I can't wait to see it. That's awesome. And the final thing is, any advice for anyone who wants to pursue anything? If it's wrestling, if it's anything that they want to do that people say that's not a career, or that's not gonna get you far. What is your advice to all the people who were in the same position that you were when it came to finding out what their career is?
So a couple of things. One, don't get caught up trying to compare yourself to other people. Things happen at different times for different people, and that's just the way it goes. I used to get so wound up because I would see like, oh, by the time so and so was this age, he'd already done this and that, and I'm behind, and But then you see like Henry Ford didn't start Ford until he was 40. Or like, and so it's like everything's just, you'll know when you're in state and you're ready and you're dialed in, and also be prepared for your goals and your values to change. Mine certainly have. Like now I'm as equally excited and committed to my business ventures as I am as as a wrestler. And at one point that would never have been the case. Like I would have just been 100% like, got to be a big time pro wrestler. And then a couple of my ventures started kind of doing all right, and now I start going, wow, like that's so gratifying. Like now I want to just commit fully to this, and I want to put more into it. Don't compare yourself to others. Don't put any time restrictions on yourself. Get rid of all those limiting beliefs. It's too hard. It's too this. It's too that. I'm not the right this. I'm not the right that. Like, you find a way, right? The way I always look at it is somebody's got to do it. It may as well be you.
Well said. And the last thing is, how do people support you when it comes to merch, when it comes to shirts? I'm a big figure guy. I don't know if you are a big figure guy, but I saw you release the variants. I don't know if that's wave 2, and I'm very excited to collect them all. I see you have, I think, all of them on your wall.
Yeah, there's a couple. There's one of them right here. With the black. Yeah. Most of these are already sold. I have to say, I haven't checked the. I'm getting ready to ship them all out tomorrow. But yeah, all the figures, the retro figures are available at nickaldis.com. There's other merch you can get too, but those are, there is very few left, and my supplement company, Legacy Sports Nutrition, We just launched 5 new products this week, and there's a women's line that Mickie's helped develop. That's all available at legacysups.com, LEGACYSUPPS.com. We've been blown away by the response to that and the growth of that in 6 months. And then as far as I'm concerned with social media, you can follow me at Real Nick Aldis on Twitter or at Nick Aldis on Instagram. I'm verified on both, so look for the little blue tick, and that's where I'll keep you up to date with everything that's going on.
All the information will be in the bio below, so if anyone missed anything, they can always check in the bio below. It'll be there. Thank you so much, Nick. Thank you, everyone, for listening. See you guys next time.
Thanks, Eric.